Three, two, one.
Welcome to episode number 31 in The Gray Stage, the book by Greg Fernandez Jr. right here. And we're being joined here by William Greg Fernandez. How you doing today, Greg?
I'm doing very good, my friend. Thank you.
Good. How you doing, William?
I'm doing pretty fantastic. It's been a while.
Awesome. For those following along, we're on chapter 15 today. This is the 31st episode. And if you've got your book with you, we'll be starting reading from page 137 today. And if you're following along on PDF, I believe it's 154. We've been doing at least one show on every chapter in this book, Greg. And your book came out in 2019. And we're going through basically reading it word for word, chapter by chapter, in the form of episodes to get this information out there. It still is the best book on this true crime story about a triple homicide in Apple Valley, Minnesota in 2015. People are really into true crime homicides now. I just got done sharing your link to two different places on social media, Greg, and your page shows all the various links and all the archives of the shows that we've done, and also has links to your book. For those interested in true crime podcasts, I do recommend this to follow this, whether it's these episodes or reading this book, or follow the Facebook pages. The Twitter hashtag is Justice for Crowleys, all one word, if you're following, listening, or interested in following on those locations. But today's show is going to be interesting. We've got the chapters called A Quick Trip to Hollywood. Once again, chapter number 15. It's only 4 or 5 pages, but it really delves into David Crowley's trip to Hollywood, and it all deals with his contract, which is one of the most, at the beginning of the case, Greg, this was the most debatable topic at this entire case. Everyone of David's closest friends and buddies and people that he was in the project said there was no contract. Yet there was a contract. And so now we get the question of the lies, or if they didn't know there was a contract, why would they not know if there was a contract? So we've got this issue hanging out like a big black cloud over this entire deal. And I think once people understand that this chapter and what really took place, it helps us hone in more on what really happened, because now we've got motive. We've got all these things about a triple homicide, money, $30 million, a Hollywood deal, and all these very things that the closest friends that are calling us conspiracy nuts have all been pushing from day one, that there was no deal. Now we've got the evidence in this chapter. Any questions, anybody, before we start off? In the chat room, maybe?
Nothing so far. I think everyone's just kind of tuning in, joining in. So
Yeah,
thank
welcome.
you, everybody, for joining us. Appreciate it.
Welcome. This is a very, very important chapter in this book, very important episode. So I'll start off with the beginning here. Once again, reading from Greg Fernandez Jr.'s book, The Gray Stage, copyright 2019. Starting off on page 137 in the book, it says, on October 26, 2017, Dan Hennon interviewed Mike Boggio III, president of Michael Entertainment Group, also called MEG. During the interview, Mr. Boggio discussed how he met David Crowley, the alleged $30 million deal, and when negotiations related to the Gray State project ended. Now, just an overview, it was Mike Boggio III and another fellow businessman named Mike O'Donnell or Mike O'Connell. Two Mikes. What's the last name? Are you guys familiar?
Yeah, it's Mike O'Donnell.
Yeah. So those two formed a company out in Hollywood and just called it MEG, Michael Entertainment Group. It's two of just both their first names is all it really is. Mike Boggio III is the president of the group. So on October 26th, this chapter really relates to talking with him on the interview that I conducted to really get the facts out relating to this, because this was the biggest crack, I think, of the holes. Everything fell through this, and once we got the answer to this, and this is 2017. This was the fall of 2017 before we knew this, and the bodies were just discovered January of 2015. So between the Facebook pages, all the Twitter, everything that was going on, this is the first time we were able to really nail this down and get some of the facts. It says, hello, Hollywood. Continuing on, Mike Boggio III met David Crowley through an unnamed mutual friend. The mutual friend connected us together, so we set up a meeting with David in California. I talked to David numerous times on the telephone prior to our first meeting, so that's how we got together, end quote. In May of 2014, David Crowley met with the Michael Entertainment Group in Los Angeles, California. Quote, "It was a very promising project," Mike Boggio explained. David wrote the first go-around of the screenplay. We went through it thoroughly, made numerous changes, advised David to make numerous changes. At first, we were taking it to the big screen, and then, as we thought about it, we figured, how can we pack in all of this information in a 2-hour or a 2.5-hour film? Let's take it to television and have a series made out of it, which would have been a lot better for the concept of David's idea, end quote. So once again, David always wanted a movie with the Gray State Project. That's why he was pitching the screenplay to Hollywood to try to get someone to bite on it to produce a movie. Well, typical movies are 90 minutes, 120 minutes, even 2.5 hours. But there was way too much to cover, is what Boggio is getting at here. Those of you who have seen the 2.5-hour, 2.5-minute trailer, there's a lot in that trailer alone, and David had multiple scripts. So he was going and writing this script to pitch it, but it really ended up turning into a TV series, a mini series, if you will. Continuing on, it says, without specifically naming names, Mr. Boggio commented on the actors considered for the Gray State Project. Quote, "We were talking about hiring some pretty substantial A-list actors to fulfill some of the roles in the project," end quote. Mike Boggio thought David's version of Gray State, quote, "would be a great A&E show. It would be a great cable network television show that could spin off into a film," end quote. And so he was talking here thinking maybe A&E could be the home for something like this.
And isn't that interesting because of what we know happened with the whole Eric Nelson's film that got on A&E? It's just very interesting how is it a coincidence? I always thought it was a very strange thing how that's where they were pitching it. David's project is supposed to go there, and then there's a hit piece that ends up going there after David died. And I always found that strange.
And I think, Greg, I think in this case, it's probably coincidence. A&E does run a lot of true crime, a lot of documentaries like that. So I suppose it would have made sense. But when Eric Nelson got a hold of it with Werner Herzog, and it did end up on A&E, it was for much different purposes, of course. It was a documentary for a hit piece documentary. But once again, it ended up on A&E first. Now it's all over Netflix. But it is interesting. I would say it's coincidental. William, do you have an idea on what you think? Is this just a coincidental thing, or A&E touches so many shows in this genre that it probably would have ended up there anyway?
To be honest, I haven't really looked too much into if it's necessarily coincidence or not. What I do know is that the way Werner Herzog, or whatever his name is, I don't know how he'd pronounce it, probably Werner, but besides the point. He did not speak very highly of David and how he carried himself. He just almost drug his name right through the mud, just even speaking just a little bit about him. The thing is, they can't really prove it. So of course they're going to go and do a hit piece on this. As for why on A&E, I think you got it right on the head. It's got a ton of true crime on there. As to why it hasn't been on, I think it's called True, which is just nothing but true crime. That's the real question there. Why hasn't it been on there?
Oh, I'm sure they're going to try to sell it there too. I'm sure Eric Nelson is going to try to make as much money off of this dead person as he possibly can.
Oh, absolutely.
No doubt.
I just don't. Guys. My thing is, that's the thing, because it hasn't made there, and that's been up for I think 4 to 5 years now, at least. True has. If it hasn't made it there, I think there's a reason behind it.
I think it's on. I think Sophia said it's on the Paramount. No, the Discovery.
Yeah, which I believe
right
is
now, right?
Yeah.
So, once that deal falls through, like the whole Netflix deal fell through, maybe it'll move there. I'm sure they're going to try to find some type of a home for it. for A and E. It only played once, as far as I know. It only played once on there. Is that normal for the true crime documentaries on that channel? I don't really have cable, so I don't really know.
I don't really watch
that
a whole
works.
lot of TV myself.
Yeah. I watch TV, but I don't have that. I don't have that one.
But you're right. The story they were pitching was more of a, not a sci-fi, but more of a drama. And now the Eric Nelson movie, the documentary, was really a hit piece, with David being the main character of the movie, kind of a hit piece against him. Whereas the first one was just a screenplay that he happened to write, and Boggio and company were pushing it to be aired there. All he was a screenwriter, but they did have a sense that he was an up and coming screenwriter, and he had some good content here. But I think it was really the fact that they liked him, as they could grab a hold of him as an up and coming. I wouldn't call it him a next Steven Spielberg, but I think he was an up and coming star in a screenwriting area, that I think that's what impressed Boggio and the other Mike the best, to say, let's get a hold of this guy, because we can do some work many years down the road with someone of his talent and his caliber. Is that right? So to say?
Makes sense.
I don't think so too.
Yeah, the next line, gets into that. It says, David was always very mature, said Boggio, very professional, very kind and courteous and outgoing and excited. That's the key word, end quote. Boggio called David's excitement about the project phenomenal. And I think we all can agree with that. He was pushing this from the beginning and did not think it was going to be just an average movie or film, but very high end, a phenomenal project. Ending up, it says, the original setting for the Gray State movie was in the Midwest Minnesota area, but MEG felt the movie setting needed to be nationwide, coast to coast, north to south. And that's very important too. They really opened up, and we're going to go full throttle with this deal, making this a full nationwide production.
Yeah, I found that very curious too. And when you compare the 2013 script and the 2014 script, that lines up. Like the 2014 script just seems very very national, right? This is a national problem. It's really a global issue here, but you can see the way that David wrote this script, and some of the criticism that I've heard people say about the 2014 script is it is a little bland. It's a little general, but I think David was purposely doing that. He really wanted this to reach a lot of different people. Didn't want to just insert one view in this. He wanted you. This is my opinion. He wanted you to watch this and kind of taking your own thing, whatever your views are on all of these different things, you could kind of relate it to it. So I think he kept it very, very general purposely, and very wisely too.
Well, the other thing I want to add real quick is the fact that he leaves, I mean, just to kind of carry on with what you're saying about the blandness of it, I think he did that on purpose because he wanted to direct the film. He made that abundantly clear several times over. Because he wanted to go and direct it, he didn't want anybody else touching it like that. So that being said, he's got the whole setting and all this. He's got the background details. Everything is in his head. Mm-hmm. See, so he left a lot of that out of the script. So a lot of these details that could be very, very important details were left out. And I think that was purposely. And I think he was doing that with Meg on purpose, because I think he was trying to get into that role with them as well.
Interesting. Yeah, probably. Now it continues on. The next bold print, it says the $30 million deal. Continuing on, it says, quote, we were negotiating with David at the time, end quote. Mike Boggio told Dan Hennon. We were talking about budgets for the film. We were talking about getting into production. Like I said, we had a list of A-list actors that I'm not going to even mention in this interview. And we talked about a $25 to $30 million budget. We could easily see the budget in this film being $25 to $30 million budget, end quote.
I'm so curious to see who these actors are or were that he was talking to, that he was, that they were thinking about this. I know he doesn't mention them, but man, so much time has passed. Maybe it's not that big of a deal now, but I would be very curious to see who some of those A-list actors were.
Well,
it would be worth to get a follow-up interview with Mike Boggio just to see some of these answers now that all this time has passed, and it would be irrelevant now as far as the actors. But back then in 2014, this was who he was thinking about. This is coming up on 8 years this is over 8 years ago now, so I don't think it would have any impact on anything. But just to satisfy our curiosity to see who these A-list these actors
I
were.
think a little different on that. I think that the actors are important to this. Is if you think about it, how many of them? I mean, we can look at like the cult practices a lot of these guys do. Okay, well, look at Isaac Cappy. I just got to mention that because I think this is where this becomes kind of relevant. There's certain actors that are involved with some peculiar things, and so what happens if they're in contact with them? They could be passing along messages. What happens? That goes higher up, and this could be why something happened, right? So that's, as I leave it open to that. It's still an open possibility that something could have happened. It could have been some Hollywood related thing. But that would be my question as to which A-list actors, especially going for such a low budget like that. We're not going to be getting like Robert Downey Jr. We're not getting Chris Hemsworth. We're not getting those types of guys. Those guys that's going to blow up the budget real quick.
But then again, William, this was a big production in 2014. Sure. We had a previous show that talked about what were some budgets of typical big screen Hollywood movies back at the time, and several fell into that $30 to $50 million budget that were huge. Now we're not talking huge movies, but substantial. And this was kind of in that mid-range ballpark. A lot of films in this were $5 to $7 million, I think, maybe even up to 10 for very, very low. But we're talking 25 to 30. That's where a lot of folks didn't. They said, I don't think David Crowley was in this because that's some big money. And we have to remember the other thing for our group, for the show here, is his own people that he was working on the project. I don't think were aware of this at all. David was doing this all behind the scenes. He was making these contracts, making these deals, working with these people and making the contacts and the networking. They didn't even know. So when it first came out that he had a $30 million deal, I think the knee-jerk reaction that it was not true, to some extent, they didn't know this was all going on. So he was already pulling away in a good way from these snakes within his own realm. But Greg, do you remember some of the titles? I think even if you Google it, now what would be a $30 million budget for a movie, some popular Hollywood movies. And it was more than I thought. Let's put it that way. That was in that range. And once again, this isn't revenue. This isn't money that would be coming into David. He wasn't, going to be making $30 million, but a budget to be expended to make a movie like this. When it got put in the can before it even got set for release, $30 million. There are some budgeted movies that are up in that range. That are I was surprised by.
Yeah, me too. Just looking up a couple of those. Well, there's always Star Wars. You could start there, I guess, but it depends on how far back you really want to go, right? My Big Fat Greek Wedding was another one, 5 million. A lot of different movies, and we also know that when they set that budget, right? We also know that they generally go over budget too, right? So they're not gonna. I mean, the first Saw, this says 1.2 million budget. I mean, that's crazy. Rocky, trying to find more that are kind of a little more newer, I guess.
Yeah.
But, I mean, yeah, I'm shocked.
And maybe if there's someone in the chat room too, just do a Google search for 2014, maybe 2014 movie budgets of popular movies, and you kind of scroll through. You can kind of get a range. We've covered that before, but like William said, it's kind of mid-range. There's of course the big ones, but there's a lot of movies that would surprise you for being in that level. But right in that middle, that middle. Now, surprisingly for me, I would assume that for an entry level. Now, if someone's been in the movie business for a while, yes, this would be a very low. But for a very first movie, a very first film, for David to be in this $25 million range, that's, I think, the surprising thing that I took away from it, for instance.
Well, and I started looking some things up just to kind of give a ballpark, because they're mentioned A-list actors. When you think A-list actors back in 2014, 2013 area, all the way through 2015, we're still looking at guys like Tom Cruise, Robert Downey Jr., Chris Hemsworth. And you got to think, Age of Ultron, right? That came out in 2015. Well, Robert Downey Jr., which would probably be one of the highest paid actors in Hollywood at the time, I believe still is, he made $80 million in that movie. And that would have been well over the budget. That's why I'm saying I think when they're saying A list, I think it's probably closer to B list actors.
Yeah.
I don't think it's any really big A list
Low,
actors.
maybe low end A list.
But even if they do go for some low end A listers, it's still going to be, they're going to take up a good portion of the budget. So
Interesting.
I think this is why they would probably have to be small roles for these big names if they're going to include them.
Gotcha.
It would have to be some people that are pretty new to acting, maybe some really, really like D-list actors, things like this, like Casper Van Dien, whatever his name is. You know, he's in like every movie, right? He's like in every franchise, Starship Troopers, Python, I mean, all sorts of other movies. He's an actor that I believe could have been considered for the movie. Honestly, I don't think he would have been bad in that, you know, along with the scripts. I think he'd be pretty good. But besides the point, still better than dating August Mason. But it's one of those things that is just like, you know, if we look at the numbers on this, like, you know, it's something I always preach. You look at the numbers, you follow those numbers, you start seeing some areas where it's like, okay, yeah, maybe not this, you know, what these guys are saying here, but maybe it's more along these lines. So
yeah, I'll have to look up more of that later on. That is interesting though. I'm very curious now to see what some of those movies.
Yeah, if you look in, you know, Wikipedia is very good too. If you look up an individual, it'll always mention the budget number, not the gross, not the tickets, but the budget for the film is interesting to see what some of these are. So this was 2014. On May 23rd, 2014, David Crowley posted an update about the deal with Michael Entertainment Group. So he made this public. This was middle of 2014. Him and his wife just moved into their house in December of 2013. He makes this post in spring of 2014. It just happened. I'm not sure how many details I can divulge at this point, but Gray State will be optioned in the next 2 weeks at a major budget and connected with A-list talent. We are connected with a producer who, above all else, wants to preserve the film's pro-liberty ideals. This is all we could have hoped for and more. Thank you all for being our strongest selling point. Let's make a movie. Now, he posted this, but we also have to keep in mind, too, that the fans of Gray State were really getting edgy, getting very itchy. When is this movie coming out? What's going to happen with it? How come nothing's been done with it? So in some of these comment sections, I know, Greg, you followed this as it was going on live. There was a lot of negativity about this project in 2012, 2013, 2014. David had to answer to get some of this stuff off his back. So I think he was glad to get this first announcement of May off, because now he was saying we are doing something. It is going to be everything we hoped for and more. And so that's going to kind of quell the crowd who was jumping down the project's back. You read some of the stuff in 2013 online. They were getting antsy. These fans were getting very antsy. Did you notice that too, William, on some of these older comments, if you've read some of these threads?
Oh, absolutely. And the thing is, I mean, there's a lot of people like me personally. I have a friend he's the one who got me into this case. He had me looking into this. That was his big thing. He's like very, very huge supporter of this movie and that Santo, or whatever it's called. I don't know if you guys remember that one. They had trailers out for it and everything. It was, yeah, but he was very, very big on that because he's like, well, this guy's got a great idea. This is going to be exposed in a whole lot. So he was falling in, he was filling me in with all of these things. But as I'm going through the comments and reading it, I mean, I think I agree with you on this. I think that he was just trying to find ways to alleviate the pressure from the fans, because without the fans, I think that's why he was trying to make the point here. Let's make a movie here. I think he's trying to really just show, hey, look, we're right here at this point. I've been working my butt off. We're almost at the point where there's going to be an actual movie, which I mean, that's what I noticed. A lot of fans were starting to back off at that point right there. They're like, all right, cool, fine. You got something going.
Yep.
But we do see there's other points where it kind of peaks up again and they're starting to get a little grouchy throughout the year too. So
yeah,
there were comments after comments right down where it's like, this movie's never coming out. You guys took our money and you ran with it. This is all a joke. This must be a psyop. I mean, David's project was being called a psyop back in 2013, 2012, which when I read that, I was like, wow, this is really, really odd stuff. And then He was
All
being
the names.
all of the things that he was being accused of, a part
Mhm.
of the crowd, his last name, the whole Mason thing, and then all of it happens. It's just very, very strange stuff.
Well, I would say follow the names, because a lot of those people on there's people that have got 2, 3 Facebook identities, right?
That's
And they're
probably,
posting the
yeah.
same things, have the conversation with themselves, even crazy stuff.
That's right. Yeah, I forgot about that. Yeah, yeah. I always forget there are trolls out there. Apparently, I don't know.
Tons of them. Too many to count.
So on the top of page 139, we continue. It says, quote, "So there were negotiations," Boggio confirmed. "We were actually trying to option a screenplay. When we option a screenplay, we option a screenplay for a certain amount of time. I think we were going for 24 months, if I remember right. And within that 24 months, we had to get into production with the film. Otherwise, the option goes back to David. So that's what our negotiations were with David at the time," end quote. Mr. Boggio then clarified, "When we talk about $25 to $30 million, that's what we budgeted for the film project. That's what we budgeted for everything to do from start to finish," end quote. So he's talking about a 24-month option. He's talking about $25 to $30 million. He said that they were in negotiations. And so I think we got most of our answers right there as far as the things that we had said early on in the case, that everyone says, no, there was no case, there's no contract, no negotiations, nothing going on. We know that there was. Now, was there a signed deal? I think that's what we're getting up to now. They were in negotiations. They wanted to move forward, but I don't think anything was ever signed yet. So that's where some of the discrepancy came in, because our detractors on the page were saying nothing was signed and they weren't moving forward with it. Whereas I do think that they were negotiating to come up with something. And then in the timing that it took to get Danny August Mason to release his contractual rights to the film is when the bodies were found. So I don't think there was any closure there. So we do have to specify that I don't think there was a contract signed and moving forward, but they were in negotiations and moving forward with that money amount. That $30 million was real. It wasn't made up. It wasn't inserted into the conversation. Those were real. Those were facts, is what we got to get through.
Yeah, and even though the contract may not have been signed, there was a contract given to David that he was meant to sign, right? As far as we know.
Yeah, they had an oral a deal. I don't know. I'm not sure if there was written and signed yet, but they were under the working assumption that a deal was in place. They were moving forward as if a deal was done. Now, was there a contract signed that he saw and then he signed and sent back? I don't think he could do that without the legal side being done. And I think that's the piece that got held up.
Right.
Gotcha.
With the legal, to try to get these two characters out of the way first. Mitch Heil, he signed and relieved himself of the stuff. Danny August Mason never did, and it kept hanging up. And that's where these 3 or 4 months really kept backing up. And that was to the point where I don't think Boggio knew what to do, because they were trying to work with David, but David was battling this other fight going on the side.
Yeah, and
they had a deal.
Right.
And was there a contract signed? I don't know. We've never seen any evidence that there was anything signed and a deal was done.
Right.
We'll get to it further in the chapter here. But when I was speaking with them on the phone, they said, he just dropped off, and we never heard from him. Later found out that he was dead. So the contracts never ended. They never put an end to them, which I think the folks thought that. What we heard David Crowley's father say was the contract went away. There was no deal. David got depressed and he was in financial straits. Therefore, he killed himself. That's the storyline that we hear, is that there was no deal. Now, no deal is very different than an ongoing deal that just hasn't been completed or come to fruition yet. They were talking like there was no deal, like it was cut off, that they were like, David, we're done. See you later. Go find someone else. That certainly was not the case.
Oh, it's really sad too, because his dad just totally went along with it. Like, oh yeah, this is totally what it is. It's BS.
Yeah, it gets interesting, because it to somewhat either he didn't know or he made that piece up to go along with the narrative. And so when you say the word sad, it's true, because it's both sad and possibly quite disgusting if he did know the truth and had to push that line to go along with the narrative.
Well, I think he might have been upset too, because David wasn't really speaking to him.
No.
I mean, you go through the phone records and you see that him and David weren't really speaking.
There were no texts.
Exactly. No text like he claimed there was. There was no phone calls. There was, even with Dan Jr., there was no phone calls or texts up to a certain point. So,
and it was Dan Sr. that says that, David told me directly that I had to walk away from it. Just feelings of the heart, I guess. It's not going to happen.
Mhm.
Well, number one, that text never took place. Number two, that's not what happened. So we got a bunch of layers of lies here going on. And once again, we don't know if it's misinformation or disinformation. The only difference of those two words is intent. Are they intending on purpose to push us down the road, which I think the Gray State guys were doing, or was it misinformation that they just didn't know? Lying about a text, I think, is more disinformation because there's intent. That text did not and never did take place. Continuing on, it says, regarding Meg's last conversation with David, according to Mike Boggio, it was sometime in September of 2014, and negotiations continued until David died. Huge statement right there. Huge statement. Negotiations continued, meaning they never ended. That's huge. We actually met face-to-face in Hollywood, Boggio said, of his last encounter with David in September of 2014. Quote, sat down right on Sunset Boulevard. Sometime in that time frame with David. David was out in California, flew out for the night just to come sit down with us to discuss the updates on the screenplay and discuss the concept and everything else. So that's when we sat down. And he actually made a new trailer. We're sitting in there watching the trailer, and then we discussed, hey, let's think about taking this to television. And we gave him the reason why. You get picked up by a network, and it was just off the heels of Sons of Anarchy leaving the network. So we figured this could be a good spin-off for the network that Sons of Anarchy was on. Now, was that A&E?
No, it's FX.
Okay, gotcha. And it would pick up the demographic of Sons of Anarchy. So we talked to him about the numbers and statistics and discussed if we take this to series, then not only do you have a series, it can play out longer. Then at the end of the series, it can go to the big screen. He was excited about it. Now we're on the top of page 140. He was open-minded about it and thought it was a great idea. I don't know where the whole depression comes into play when it comes to regards to making Gray State Network, end quote. Now we get the depression. This is the president of the company saying, I don't know where this whole depression thing came out, because that's all we heard in the press. Remember, the mainstream media said David Crowley was depressed, pulling himself away, shooting his family, his daughter, his wife, and then himself. He had no money. So we know now we're getting into the guts of this, the facts, if you will. There was no depression. He didn't know anything about the depression side of things. He talked to David, called him phenomenal, and called him an up-and-coming guy. Now, the next paragraph says, quote, we put out an offer to David to option the contract, said Boggio, which would have gave him some money up front, and then we would have went and ran with the film project or the television project. David would have been a producer on the film, so he would have been paid to be a producer on the film. Then he would have reaped some of the benefits of whatever the film grossed. We all would have. David had an idea. It was a very, very, very strong idea. So that's why we all got together. End quote. So now we're getting to, William, you mentioned that he was interested in directing all of this. And I think he was at the beginning. And then when it turned into the web series or the television series, and it got drawn out longer. And we know at the very end that it really wasn't going to be David directing it. He would have been a producer and assisting and helping out with it. Mm-hmm. And it sounded like as it morphed, David was more okay with pulling away from the director to say, you know what, I think this is all in good hands. I'll help you with the producing, and this thing can go out for several seasons on television.
Right.
And that's actually what I think they got through to him to say, we can get another director in place. It won't be you, but we can still keep you engaged. And David was okay with that at that point. At the very beginning, he was lock, stock, and barrel. I'm going to do all this myself.
Well, the great thing about that is if you look at what he did, when you look at the two different scripts that we got the Daniel Nicasi and then we got the Daniel Walker. You look at the Daniel Walker, you can see that one's definitely meant for a series, because even the way it ended, you're looking at probably about a season-ish about how long that script is. Now, he left
Okay.
a lot more details in that one. The initial one, he left some details, but it was like the things he had to have the details for. But everything else was very, very vague on details. You look at the second one, it's not as, I don't want to say as bland. So, which I think that's why him moving on to a producer, why that makes sense with that script.
Yeah, I'm very curious about when because we have his scripts, but the last script we have that it's dated, it's in May of 2014. Once David knows that this is going to be made a TV series, there's no treatment. I mean, there has to be. He's got to be writing some type of a treatment or something, but there's nothing typed up. There's nothing that we have. There's nothing that I've seen even floating out there, but that must be out there somewhere. Whatever David was going to do with this TV series must be out there somewhere.
I'm sure it is. I'm sure it's probably in one of his his Dropbox or something.
If it was, I mean, he could have been writing it on paper too, right? It could be in a notepad that is no longer with us anymore. Somebody may have taken.
Because the offer was made by Boggio and Meg, MEG, would they have, if we got a secondary follow-up interview with Mike, for instance, that question could come into play too. Would they have the rights, or would they be sitting on some historical data as far as a document like that? Maybe would they would be able to answer that, yes or no?
I don't think they'd be able to. I don't think they'd have any rights, but just because there was no deal signed and just because of legal obligations, I think that's where that would fall.
Okay, gotcha. Okay. And it says here, we put out an offer to David. So at the top of that paragraph, you see where he says that, quote, we put out an offer to David to option the contract. So, and I'm not too familiar with this. Does that mean then that there was an offer made and David didn't respond yet?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that he's speaking directly about that one contract that we do have access to that wasn't signed.
Okay.
Because he couldn't sign it. I mean, if the minute he signs that, there becomes a legal issue with Danny August Mason. He could fight that.
Cool. So we do have for the naysayers out there. Let's just say this: that there was an offer made to David. It was never canceled. It was never revoked. It was never, they never pulled away. There was an offer made. There was. David didn't respond yet, so there was nothing official as far as a deal signed. I'll say, but they were moving forward and working under the assumption that this was all going to happen. They were on this, all this was tabled, because of this legal stuff. But so for the detractors out there, they did have, this was all on the up and up. We get it right here in black and white. Wow. Now, maybe we're getting to it. Sorry, here on the next paragraph, it goes on to say, asked about the rumors that David walked away from the project or that Meg decided not to go forward with the project, Mike Boggio set the record straight. Quote, we didn't fire David. We didn't get rid of David. However, that went. And he didn't walk away from us. I mean, there was never any of that. And I don't even know where those two ideas came from. Nothing to my knowledge, period. Again, we never told David to get lost. I tried contacting David after our September meeting or discussion. I tried contacting David for months to discuss things. I didn't hear from him or anything. So I was getting a little nervous myself. Not nervous for our business transactions. David and I became friends. Not only were we business acquaintances, but we became friends. I called him on the holidays, wished him a happy Thanksgiving to him and his family. I did that numerous times until I heard the very, very disturbing news. End quote. So now we get this quick relationship where it goes from working on the deal, working as a business acquaintance, to having a lot in common, actually becoming friends, calling on the holidays, asking how the family's doing. And so these guys became friends. But it's nice that Mike Boggio here goes out of his way to clarify. And this is the one thing I wanted in this interview, for him to be made clear that they did not fire him. They did not tell him to get lost. And David did not come back to Boggio or Meg and say, I'm no longer interested. Please stop contacting me. None of those things were ever said. So there was a deal in place, period.
Right.
Now, at the very end of 140, it says, when Mr. Boggio received the news of David's death, he was in total shock. He said, I didn't believe it. I didn't believe it. Quote, so Christmas comes, Boggio continued, December 2014, I guess it is, comes around. I call David on Christmas. around
No, you
Christmas
didn't.
time to wish him and Kamel and the baby happy holidays. I went out of town for New Year's. When I got back, I called him to wish him a happy New Year. And then I still didn't hear anything. So I felt it was kind of weird. So I contacted a mutual friend that David and I both had and asked this person. Let me take a step backwards. Prior to that, I called this person saying, "Man, I haven't heard from David in at least a month. Have you heard from him?" He's like, "Nah, but it's the holidays." You guys got him in the studio writing. When he gets into that writing mode, he shuts down and secludes himself. So he just focuses on what he needs, what he has to do. It's the holidays coming up. I'll run by and see him and see the family and see how things are going. And I'm like, all right, cool. So like another month goes by. And then after New Year's, after I left David a happy New Year message on his voicemail, I called this person and said, "Man, I still haven't heard from him. Did you go over there for the holidays?" ? The mutual friend said that he had not gone to David's house yet. Then, like the next day, Boggio continued, the guy calls me and says, "Did you hear?" And when he told me, I was in total shock. So do we know who this person is?
It's Zach. It's got to be Zach.
Okay, gotcha. And Zach's a Minnesota guy?
I think so. I got his phone number directory up right now. So
Gotcha.
Let's
So
see.
he said, did you check on him? And he goes, "You know what? I never did get around to going over there." So how close was this friend? Do you guys know?
Well, Zach would have been in Seattle. He's got Seattle area code.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I mean, he could be in Minnesota, but I mean,
And there's
End of the
a good film scene in Seattle,
Mhm.
right? There's a pretty popular film scene out there too.
oh yeah,
So I don't know. I mean, when I first heard that, I was like, wow, it sounds like this friend is stalling for something.
yeah,
That was the first reaction. Not saying that that's my only reaction or what I really think happened here, but it just sounded like this person is kind of stalling there. And then William, you also brought up when Dan was reading about Michael Boggio saying that he called David. You're saying that call is not on the phone records?
it's not. I honestly, I thought my mic was muted when I said something, but so sorry about that. But
It's okay.
but no, he did not call all throughout. Like he did not get the new phone number. I'm just looking right directly through.
Maybe he had the old phone. Well, the old phone number would have forwarded to the new one, possibly. I mean, maybe he was calling the old one. That
That's
would
what I'm
have.
thinking.
You know
But
what?
that's
It
still
would have
weird.
been no, because the old phone number didn't get shut off until October.
Right.
So if they were I don't know, man. Yeah, I
It's
don't
the
know.
Thanksgiving part that gets me because
Yeah,
at that point it's like, okay, well, why are you contacting another phone?
I mean,
If
maybe he
you're- if
didn't
you're-
have David's new phone because from what Michael Boggio was saying, he had trying to be contacting David for months. So that would make
Right.
sense that he doesn't have his new phone. He's calling the old phone.
Which
He
is-
doesn't know
But
it.
see, here's the
Right.
weird part though. So think of it from this perspective. If they're working together, why doesn't he have his new phone? You'd think with the contract and everything, he's trying to get this going, he'd have his new phone. He
Now
doesn't.
you would assume.
Mhm.
Now this is, he makes the announcement David does on Facebook in May, and he flies out there once. I think it was June, and then they say in September is when he comes down again on Sunset Boulevard, and they sit down and have the talk face to face in September. And now
Right.
the month before is when David went through this awkward birthday party for Rania
Mhm.
and had the conversation with Danny August to say, you got to release your rights and all this. And so September they're pretty much locked in. And so October and November go by and he's not hearing anything back. To your point, William, by this point, if he changes his phone number, he certainly would give it to his number one, the guy doing the contract
Right.
for the option. So your suggestion is, how would they not have the right phone number at this level of negotiations? And I think that's a good point. Now, once again, maybe one of them lost it. Maybe he didn't give it to him. Maybe he wrote the wrong one down. I don't know. I can't answer to that. But you're right.
Right.
They're going a couple months down after serious negotiations, and you show no record of him calling David on the new phone ever.
Mhm.
Right.
Correct.
So if he's calling he's either calling the old number or he's lying. Is the only thing we can
Right.
assume here. Is nothing ever happened, or he called the old number, or option C, that's something we don't know about, happened. But really, right now, he didn't call the new number. There is no evidence of him calling the new number, is what you're saying. So he either called the old, did not get the new, or made the whole thing up. We don't know. Now, the talking here, from what I'm picking up with Mike Boggio, all seems to me that it's honest to goodness. He's very authentic. Now, what do you guys think? Is that something that he could be just pulling over on me, and I'm falling for it, or do you guys find him to be authentic and truthful in what he's saying and his actions?
Well, he's
Yeah.
trying to.
Go
Oh
ahead.
yeah, sorry about
Go
that. No, go for it. Go for it.
No,
Go ahead.
yeah, definitely. He definitely, when I listened to it, to that call, yeah, he didn't have to talk with you either. So the fact that he was able to give you that time, and we know other people have talked with us, and so I've compared some of those other talks with some of the Gray State Goons compared to your talk with him, and it was totally different. I felt like he was basically blindsided by a lot of different things. It makes me wonder too if David was actually, maybe it wasn't Zach Carter, so maybe it was David Crowley stalling. Was David Crowley working with somebody else? Was David Crowley looking at other ways? Maybe David didn't want to do the TV series, but he's going to tell them yes. Oh yeah, cool. That's great. Maybe he really didn't want to do a TV series. Maybe he was still trying to pitch this as a film. Maybe he thought, well, if these guys want to do it, maybe I can find somebody else to. And the fact that he hadn't signed any contracts really makes me think about that. That maybe it was David Crowley that was stalling, looking at other things, or maybe there were people in his ear saying, "Hey, don't go with those guys. We got some guys here. We got some other people here that we can pitch this to." So many different things. Totally speculating, but when I listen to, and everybody needs to listen to Dan's call with Mr. Michael Boggio. It's a 38-minute call. You can listen to it, and you can decide whatever you think about it. I just found that 38 call or 36-minute call really helped me and really changed my view on a lot of things, and really kept me going on this case, because after listening to it, I had so many more questions. And the whole movie thing is just to me, there's something very big here that is flying over my head, something I'm just not seeing here. It's right in front of my face, and I just cannot grasp it or just say, okay, I got it figured out. Now I understand it. Every time that I listen to that call, I just have more questions, even 5, 6, 7 years later. So,
Now, William, what do you think when you hear this or watch the interview? Does he come off as authentic to you? Your thoughts?
Oh, absolutely. He comes off very authentic, because it's more or less he's trying to recall things from his memory. And I mean, just being able to do that, sometimes it's not always easy.
Correct. He didn't have a list of notes. I think I caught him driving in his car or something. He was not prepped for a meeting to answer certain questions that I had given him in advance. We both just winged the conversation.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I think it's pretty authentic, but at the same time, I mean, it begs the question, because if he's in contact with Zach, we know Zach was contacting David via phone number. But if he's also saying he'll swing by, that raises some questions. That's now seeming like somebody that was also in the area. Now, if we're looking at people that are in his area, who do we know that's actually contacting David that's in the area? Then that's where you start looking at the people that are in his group already. Potentially. But there's also the other thing I also want to bring up too is Greg brought up a very good point, so did you, about the whole, was he talking to somebody else? Well, he was talking to what was the guy's name? I think his last name was Allen, I think it was.
Jason Allen?
Yes. In that email there, he seemed almost like he was like, okay, well, I've got other options. This is the route I still want to take. And he's talking about movie deal and all this. He's talking about video games. I mean, you look at what they got from the Mikes, there's no video game deal. There's nothing. It's just, here's the money. And there very well could have been some things talked about.
He would have had the option to do all that stuff, though. They were just after the film Right.
Right.
Right. That's pretty much it. So even if you think about that, when it gets turned into a TV series, do they have to write a whole new contract then at that point? Because now we're not talking about a film
Right.
project. Now we're talking about a TV series. So that could be another reason why this contract did not get signed. But that's a big deal, unless there is a signed contract out there that we just have not seen. And maybe, definitely, if there was, then I think Michael Bosia would have probably mentioned it to you.
And so
I
just to
guess.
kind of give you guys a quick little recap, I'm looking through the old phone numbers right now. And so I've already found on September 12th, Boggio and Crowley had been speaking. And this is just through the phone calls. This isn't even through the text yet. But yeah, they were speaking. So I mean, so far it's lining up that the guy was telling the truth. But the thing I have a little suspicion about is, why didn't David give him the new number? That's my question, because I'm seeing all the way through September, no problem, they're talking.
Now, do we know that was David communicating with him outside the new number, for instance, on a static social media, a Facebook Messenger, on social media, Twitter's, direct message, contacting him somewhere else, and Mike just never chose to call him on the phone number, the new phone number,
Right.
but they were still in communication. Maybe we'll find that out with the texts and whatnot. Now, we do know that if David took this deal or another deal, him and Comel were still working loosely with the real estate agent in Los Angeles looking at homes. That this came up another time, which means he would have had a deal of some sort to move away and look at homes and being closer to Hollywood. There was a real estate agent, and they were looking at homes, and I think they were sending him, the gal, their agent was sending them some criteria of, here's homes in the area that fit your criteria, that we haven't gotten into too much on the show here, but they were looking, or at least made a preliminary look for homes in the area, thinking we're going to get out of the Apple Valley, Minnesota home anyway, that they had just moved into a little over a year before. So he had something in the hopper. Not necessarily making much more money, but he was looking to go to LA. Whether the deal with Boggio was true or he had another deal, he had some deal somewhere that they were looking into real estate. Maybe that, and also the reason of getting away from the family and the circle of close friends that he had there that turned out to all be snakes. Either way, but there was that they were moving forward not only on the contract, but moving forward on homes and looking at property.
So that's the part I haven't been able to find anything on that. And
I was going to give that to Greg, I think, last episode, and I didn't. So maybe I find it here after the show and send that over, some of that communication as far as the emails looking at property with the real estate agent in the Los Angeles area. So he was interested in taking that next step. And I don't think,
I believe you. And that's the thing. It's just just for the proof of things. I like to have it right there anyways, but
yeah, I'll get this after the show here.
Oh, appreciate it.
I got it saved in a folder somewhere. I'll do it right away. But I think I was going to do that last episode, Greg, and I never did. So, so now it reminds me. I'll make a note and get it off, because that was very telling for me when I saw that communication.
I mean, it seems. I mean, as you look over the journal and all this, they do talk about how they want to go and move to LA or somewhere over in like the California area, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. In the journal, they talk about it, because I know they talk about moving away from Minnesota. They want to get away from everything that's there.
Yep.
He wants to get away from his family, his so-called friends. Comel wants to get away from her family, so things like this, that kind of comes up. It's a little interesting.
So we got the final page. I'm at the bottom of 141 here. It says owning the Gray State franchise. Now this is an interesting topic and very important. I'm glad you have this in the book, Greg. It says, who owned the rights to the Gray State project? Who owns them now? If the deal with MEG was only with David, where did Danny Mason fit in? I have no idea what David and Danny's deals were, Mike Boggio related to Hennon. I can't answer to that. We had nothing behind that, and we didn't have anything to do with that whatsoever. We didn't advise David to do that. Now, that makes sense. That was legal. That was illegal, because I think he could have moved forward with the film and the film franchise and the internet or web series or the TV series without that. And one of the users on the comments here on the web, on the YouTube, did mention that did he have to release Danny August Mason to move forward,
Yes.
or was that just in his best interest to do so? I think it was in his best interest per his lawyer. I think it was Adam
Right.
Gibson, that said you should get that squared away and close the deal on that first. You don't have to. You can move forward with the deal
Right.
and move forward with the contract, but I would clean up that loose end first and then move forward. And that's why Danny August Mason was delaying for month after month after month after month until finally David Crowley gave him the deadline to say, you got December 16th to shit or get off the pot. What's going to happen here?
Right.
You can't go both ways and keep leading me on. And that's when then the very next week, as the bodies were found, I think that's what gets mostly into our motive, our means motive opportunity comes right in that time frame with Danny August Mason, stringing along David for all these months until he gives him a hard deadline and says, I'm moving forward without you.
Right.
That's when Danny August Mason knew the time was off the clock. The time had ran out. Something needed to happen. And Danny August Mason is only in this for the money. So now you get the bodies dead, $30 million deal. It's not too hard to back into what probably happened here, but very interesting. But I do think, to the listener that wrote on that on the comment, that legally he didn't need to do anything with Danny August Mason. He could have just moved forward with it, but he would have ran into a hell of a lot of trouble down the road, as we know, because you get some people in it for the real reason, authentically want to move forward with the movie, and those who want to move forward with the movie for the money reasons. And now that's where we get, in this case, we get the two heads butting. Who wants to do it for authentic, not to make money, not to be rich, but to get the message out, David, and who wants to make money, Danny. And now you get December 24th, 25th, 3 dead bodies found, and the script lands into younger Junior Crowley's lap, who's best friends with Danny August Mason, essentially. And now you know how things all come back around. And a few months later, we get a franchise in the state of Minnesota, a Secretary of State business dealing that Gray State Universe LLC comes into existence, and he tries to trademark the Gray State logo in the months following the deaths. And who did that?
Shady.
Was none other than Danny August Mason. So
Right.
you can tell whose motive is what by what actions they actually took in the months after the deaths. It's not too hard to figure that out. Now, the very last 2 paragraphs says, Dan Hennon then asked if the script still had value. Well, Mike Boggio answered, when all this transpired, we backed away. We backed away because of all the conspiracies and everything else. For a long time, for at least over a year, we didn't even discuss it. We just figured it was too toxic to even be involved with. Whoever got involved, Boggio continued, I know since then they've made something. I know there were a couple of guys out there that contacted me saying, hey man, we made this thing. We want you to see it. What's your thoughts? We never even got involved. Then we had a conversation at least a year, if not longer than a year, after David's death with David's dad. And I think it was Danny Mason. I think it was. I can't remember for sure. But we had a conversation with them about picking up this thing, back up and running with it, because as far as I remember, David's dad got the rights to the film, or got the rights to the David's estate, so he wanted to do something with it. We started talking with David's dad, and then nothing ever transpired out of it. Now, this is some shocking stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Thoughts, William?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's so just to kind of clarify a couple things, I wanted to go and hit something on the head real quick. So earlier we were talking about the legality of Danny August Mason, that whole thing. That basically, if you guys were familiar with the Friday the 13th settlement or kind of issue they had there with the writer of the first movie, there was an issue. And so they just recently settled on it. It's a long process and it takes forever. And that's the thing, is Danny August Mason would have been able to come out ahead with a little bit of money. And the longer it could have went on, he could have went in for damages, all sorts of other things. So this we're talking, it would have been a good chunk of change, which is why he was getting with Adam Gleason so early on. And we know that they were talking, I think it was as early as, I believe, April. I believe it was. I got to go and take a look at the phone records again, but I believe that's when they started talking. So I know that they were talking to Adam Gleason with with the Mikes as well. So there's this big old money trail here. Is basically what we're looking at here, and the potential of a lot of money going to Danny August Mason. So just to hit that on the head. So yeah, but he could have proceeded. It would have been a big process for him to get himself out of. But as for this whole revelation about the dad and Danny August Mason speaking to the Mikes like a year after or a little after, it seems a little disturbing. Why would his dad want to do something with that? Wouldn't his dad just kind of want to just let it rest, just let it go? You know, I mean, if he's saying there was no deal, why is he getting in contact with him then? If he's saying David said he didn't run with the deal, it's over. It's, you know, he decided it was a matter of the heart or whatever. Why is he now going to speak to the Mikes about it? That just tells you right there he's lying. And there's intent. He chose to lie to the police. He chose to lie to everybody. There's more to this. And the fact that Danny August Mason is still tied in with this says a whole lot.
I think all of the Gray State Goons are tied in with this, though. I think they kind of they were trying to create this bubble around David's dad. When I look at David's dad, I don't really see too much that David's dad did wrong as far as knowingly lying and things like that.
Right.
It could happen. It could not. I don't want to accuse him of that, because when I look at this stuff, it looked like he kind of made the same mistake that David made. He surrounded himself with these very shady people. And then all of a sudden, those same people are now trying to surround David's dad. And they want to move forward with it. David's dad does not need money. He does not need to make this happen. If David's dad wanted to, he could make a real film showing that his son did not do this at any time. At any time. He could do that. He could still do that now.
He could hire a private investigator to actually figure out what exactly happened. And of course, not Kenneth Maines, because that guy's a scam. So
yeah, whatever you do. But hey, you know, I mean, that was part of the whole process. And I think Kenneth Maines, I think we had a good chance to really get it, but yeah, he just kind of dropped that ball. But
speaking on that though, wasn't his show also on A&E?
I thought it was he had a History Channel show, and I know he was in the works, or something was in the works, and right after this came out that Dan Hannon hired him, and we saw how bad he did. All of a sudden, I'm not saying it's related, it could be coincidental, but all of a sudden Kenneth Maines deal is dead too. So.
Yeah. Kind of ironic at that point.
It's kind of strange.
Yeah, he was doing, you know, the whole series on the Zodiac Killer and some other true crime stuff, and I don't know if that was A&E or not. More than likely, one of his projects may have ended up over there. You know, who knows? But yeah, it's interesting. The whole scenario is now the Boggio family. Boggio Group says they stepped away, which I think is a good business move with all this toxic stuff going on. They stepped away. Then a year or two later, people start reaching out. They start, well, maybe we can do something with this. But it's funny that it's Danny August Mason now and Dan Crowley Sr. involved. It's all too interesting because, like we've said from the very beginning, where is that script going to land? If David dies, the rights are going to go to his wife. If his wife dies, the rights to that script are going to go to the daughter. So what do we get here? All three of the heirs, all three of them are dead. So now the question is, does it go to the Elam family or the Crowley family? I still don't know how that happened, but why would it go to the Crowley family? Wouldn't
it go to him because it's David's Crowley's project. So whoever owns like what Michael Boggio said, the Crowley estate. That's where it really is. So that's where it kind of gets in.
So I get. And that may have been the thought process with the criminals planning this whole thing, is saying it's going to end up there. We have to kill all three to make it land on the Crowleys because they are favorable with us. They are allied with our thinking.
Right.
And we've already got Dan Sr. compromised, so to say. Dan Jr. needs money and a job. Danny August Mason wants money. Sean Wright wants money. Mason Hendricks, all these guys are riding the coattails, waiting for some big thing to come in. Now all that's left is the script. They have to get the script. And what we find is that they get it. And they wait a little bit and they move forward with it. Something that we had predicted from the very time. From this all happening, we said they're going to move forward and spin this into something else, even if it's a lighter contract, not $30 million budget. I've said from the very beginning, if it's Danny August Mason involved, he may say, look, let's strip it down and make it cheaper. Do a budget for $15 million to get a movie out. At least we're going to get a movie out, and we're all going to make money. And so that's exactly what they do. They contact the Boggios again to say, let's get this movie going. In fact, the words were, we've got a new product ready to go. We want you to see it. There's a new trailer. I didn't know anything about that. Did you guys know that they, moved on and made a trailer about it? Or did
With Joe Biggs and all that?
With the Joe Biggs and
Terrible.
some guy named Elvis. But I mean, even then there was a trailer that was filmed back in 2013, maybe, that they put out that Sean Wright made a big deal about. Hey, Danny August Mason put that trailer out there, and he didn't get the clearance from Sean Wright and from some other of these guys. So that's when this internal war between these Gray State goons really came to a head, where we could all see it, and we could see it. These guys are not all on the same page. They're all looking at the same project. They all want to do something with this project for them, not for David Crowley, because if they cared about David Crowley and David Crowley's project, they'd be right here with us. Understanding David Crowley did not do this. These guys just have no brain cells. How do you think how are you going to walk in and pitch something like this to a Hollywood company and say, oh yeah, and this was also created by somebody who ended up killing a 5-year-old child, killed himself, and killed his wife? Do you think anybody's really going to pick that up? I mean, I just don't understand their logic and even moving forward with it. But but you're totally right. We knew they were going to do this.
It's mouth breather activity.
So I think that, our page was drawing all this attention in April and May and June. And we saw already right away that Danny August Mason was going through a legal firm to get that Gray State logo and the branding copyrighted. And then he started a new company with the state of Minnesota, with the Secretary of State. And once we pointed out in the month of, I think it was May, someone on our page says, that Screen Actors Guild, David Crowley owns the rights to that script until the year 20. Was it 20? What was that registration for the script? It was due that he was going to own the rights until the year 2030 or something.
Yeah, it was an option.
Not even the option, but
not even the option.
On the frame on the wall that he had, it said he owns his rights from this period, and they weren't going to get it anyway. Even if it landed in their lap, they couldn't do anything with it. And that's when we see the very next month, or even a couple weeks later, Danny August Mason moves to Texas and cancels the project, pulls out. He shut his business down and didn't proceed on the trademark for Gray State. It's like our group gave him the advice on what to do, what he couldn't do, and he was reading our page. Says, "Oh, I guess I can't do anything more with this." Moved to Texas with Biggs, and or wherever Biggs was.
Right.
There was nothing more on the contract, nothing more on the movie. Everything it all went silent. They were reading our pages.
Yeah, no, you were the big threat, Dan. You were the one that they were really, because you were putting this stuff out there, and this is what they did not want. They loved people speculating about the government. They loved people speculating about David was killed by some cult or all of these wild theories. But you became a big threat because you were actually trying to look at what really happened here. That was the big threat.
The means, motive, and opportunity.
That's
and
it.
Right. The biggest criticism I've ever drawn from before even William came on is when I dare mention David's brother, Dan Jr., involved in the killing of his brother. I brought that up, not saying that he did the killing, but I said, I feel that his brother's involved directly or indirectly with the death of David Crowley. And I got the threats the very next day, hours after I said that, is when everyone came down on me for merely suggesting that his brother was involved. And now we look back after everything that's been said and done, and it's 99% sure that Dan Crowley Jr. is involved and was involved. Now things start to make sense. Why, once you get over that target is when you know you're on the right track. And boy, that $50,000 bank withdrawal, the lie that Dad said as far as pulling the money out, but he was out of the country. And he couldn't have done it. That withdrawal was done at a bank in Minneapolis.
Oh, we'll get this. So if you look at the signature, that's not David Crowley's signature.
Nope.
No, that's actually very, very, very similar to Dan Jr.'s signature.
So what the suspicion is that Dan Crowley Sr., got wrapped up into this more so from the bank fraud case that he would send him behind bars in this fraud case of the bank withdrawal from a POD account payable only upon death of a trust fund that his son took out $50,000 that I think he had to support shoving that aside so police would not investigate in exchange for letting the homicide thing go away and go along with the narrative before sending his only remaining living son to prison. The other one was dead. So he got caught up. I think they're all caught up in a compromising position and not knowing what to do and playing the lesser of two evils to get out of it. And hopefully the whole thing goes away.
Well, David did call it the Crowley curse.
Yeah, I was always curious about the Crowley curse too. Story for another day.
That's what comes of it. There's so many things going on with the onion peel. And if we can get more folks to follow this case on Greg's podcast account or on YouTube, we're long past the speculation. We're long past the theories. And we know, once again, we can throw away the whole government conspiracy. Black ops, men in black came in and swooped in and killed the family. Once again, if David Crowley was a threat, they would have killed David Crowley. But there's a reason all three needed to die, is to have that asset.
Right.
David Crowley didn't have many assets. He didn't have fast cars and big homes and big cars and big houses. He had one asset, the script. And they needed that to fall into the hands to move forward. And that's exactly what they did. It's ridiculous how obvious this stuff is, but by these numbskulls running the show here. The idiots are so bad that we're solving it on armchair investigative shows like this on a podcast, and we got it solved.
Well, I mean, there's more and more of these types of podcasts popping up, solving crimes before even the police do. It's pretty ridiculous. Police
could have solved this whole thing years ago.
All we have to say is Uvalde.
The police could have solved the bank fraud case. The police could have looked into the Kate Crowley mysterious death. They could have done all this, but somehow they too now are compromised.
Correct.
Who knows? Now, I just got back from a camping trip. Guess where I went? To a camping trip south of the Twin Cities. I was in Owatonna this weekend.
Oh, wow.
Oh, nice.
Owatonna, Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
With family and friends. So what I do, I go into town to do a little drive around, right? Tell myself, I say I got to go into town to get some firewood and get some gas. But I go past the Quick Trip. And I think, Kate Crowley worked here. One day didn't show up for work and she was found dead. You drive by her house and you look at the patio where her body was found at midnight, slumped over the table, all in Owatonna. And then you drive past Dan Crowley's home. Big, long driveway, big estate, big home near the Straight River, right in town, before the town blew up and got really big. That was one of the bigger estates in the city.
Wow.
And so you drive by these things and you just think, do the locals even know how the crime of the century, some people say, is really sitting right in their backyard? It has nothing to do with Apple Valley. The crime, most of the parts of this crime have to do with the coming out of the outgrowth out of Owatonna, Minnesota. Small town, 26,000 people out kind of in the country. But there's a big estate there where the kids grew up. There's a little house there with a wife. After getting divorced, Kate was living in a house, found out on the patio, and working at a little innocent Quick Trip, which is a convenience store very popular in the Midwest. Gas station, convenience store. That's where she had a secondary job, just making some extra money part-time. They all loved her there. And so, rest in peace. Kate is now dead. But a lot of this comes out of Owatonna, Minnesota, which is about a 45-minute drive south of Apple Valley. And that's where those kids, grew up. Parents got divorced.
Are those two houses close? Are they the two? No, are they pretty
the one's
far
in
away?
kind of an and the original house I think they lived in was kind of downtown in an older part of town, and then she bought a newer house in a newer development lived there by herself, was dating a guy. He's the one who didn't hear from her that night. Went and did the check and found her collapsed over the back table. They never really found a true reason, maybe alcoholism or something. But she worked at a local quick trip gasoline stop. So you drive by this place, it takes you back that you're in the vicinity of all this evil, and it's just nasty. But
wouldn't that drive anybody to drink, though?
She was involved with a lot of stuff, and who knows what that family was even like, or what they went going through, and what was happening there behind closed doors as those kids were smaller. We don't know. We can't assume, but that was not a normal family growing up. That was not. There were things going on there, and all we can do once again is speculate. David turned out to be the only, I don't want to say the normal kid there, but he was the only, straight one. His brother was gay. His sister is a lesbian. And so David was shunned. Him and his mother were the only two people, I think, that had a good head on their shoulders as far as knowing big picture kind of stuff.
Right.
Yeah, you got blinders on there, but that's all I've got for today. Greg, any other questions for this one?
Not for me. No, I'm good. Maybe William, if you have any final words or anything. No,
we covered it all. No, we definitely covered it all.
I think you covered it all. Yeah.
All right, thanks, guys. I got to jump off, but we'll see you next month.
All right, my
sounds
friends.
good.
Thank you both.
Thanks, guys.
All right, and there it is. There is the next episode here, and we will be shutting this one down soon. Unless anybody in the comments, in the comment section, has any questions or comments or concerns or anything you want to bring up, that will conclude this episode of this month's podcast. We're going to be back next month for what I think is going to be the beginning of some of the best podcast episodes that we're going to have, because this all deals with the Gray Shame chapter. Now, this was a very special chapter to me. I put this purposely at the end of this book for several reasons. The first article that I ever wrote, this is what I titled it here. This is the longest chapter in this book, and this is kind of my early version of a timeline of what was happening here with the Crowleys, and tried to grab everything that I could, because whenever you hear about a case like this, the first things that you want to do is you want to try to grab as much data as you possibly can before it gets taken down. Now, there was a lot of things that were taken down that I did not get, that I could not grab as early as I should have, as I wanted to. I was still a couple of days late into this case, so that's probably why I wasn't able to grab a lot of the information that I really wanted to on this. But the Facebook posts, the things about David Crowley going back, I try to go back as far as I possibly could, but the main things, what this really will focus on, is how David Crowley and his wife met, everything that they were doing past the 2012, past this trailer. That's really where it really gets pretty crazy, I think. But at least in the last year, of David's life, his postings on Facebook, his postings, those are some of the main things that I really tried to focus on early back then, because that's all that I had. I didn't have anything. I didn't have the 94 pages. We had lots of questions, but we also wanted to make sure that we were able to document things that David Crowley was saying from his own words, so that we could compare that to what people would then say about him. So when they tried to slander him, we could at least say, well, that was true, or you know what, David Crowley says something totally different from that. So I am really looking forward to the September 1st podcast, because we're going to get in to this chapter here. And like I said, this is the longest chapter in this book by far. So this is going to be several different chapters. This is also the last chapter in this book here. So where we go from there, what we do from there, we have a couple plans, and we'll definitely be in contact with that. I do want to thank everybody who has joined us here for this podcast, and this will come out on August 1st. So thank you all for tuning in here to this early version. And with that said, if anybody has any questions, I'll keep the chat open up a little bit longer, or if William wants to say anything else about what's going to come up. Hopefully William will be able to join us next month as we go through some of the early stuff. Kind of, this is almost like the way that I wrote this chapter is kind of like coming back full circle to kind of, this book starts with David's death. And I wanted it to end where what we learn, what we know more about David Crowley. Not so much about his death, but about this person. And I don't know David Crowley. I was not a fan of David Crowley's work, but we do have all of his, Facebook posts and things that he has said. And so I wanted to try to document all of that data and put that in there. And I felt that this would be a great way to kind of end this book, where it kind of leads all the way up to his death. So from this point on, you could almost watch this or listen to these podcasts, these upcoming podcasts first, because you're going to get to know David Crowley based on what he says, based on what he has posted, based on not what other people have said about him, but I really wanted this to be more about his quotes and his wife's quotes. And there's going to be some interesting things here. So if you do want to go and, over the next couple weeks, the next couple months, read this book, at least read this chapter here. And I think you will learn a lot about David Crowley, or this will, maybe trigger some of your views, some of your thoughts about David Crowley. I wanted to make sure that I pulled what David Crowley put on the actual LinkedIn profile so that we had it, so that one day it didn't get taken down. But look at all of these accomplishments. And this was, I think I found this, this couldn't have been updated more than, 2012, 2013, at the latest 2014. And even by that point, he has done so many different things and has accomplished so much back then. I mean, he was a translator. So he was an Urdu script translator. It's just, he did so many different things. We're going to talk about all of that stuff based on the documents that we have, based on David Crowley's Facebook posts. And I look forward to coming back here next month and talking about that. And who knows, we may do a couple bonus shows in between them. We could always do a show going through the 36-minute video where Dan Hennon talks with Michael Boggio, so you can get the whole the whole view of everything that we know about this Hollywood deal. The other thing that I'm working on, and I'll just end it with this, is that I am also working on going through David Crowley's going through those contracts. And I just happen to know somebody who deals with contracts. And so I want to go through those contracts and maybe get some of their views. Based on that, I may put it out. I may make it public. Maybe there's nothing to it. But if there's anything that I feel that will help this case, I will make sure to put that out there. So with that said, God bless you all. Hope you have a great Sunday. Let's get ready for this week. And we're going to have another great week here. And thank you so much for your continual help. You are the ones that are keeping this case going. You all help us keep this case going. Catherine, Sophia, Dan Hennon, Mr. William Rail, so many great people that have been able to just kind of jump in on these shows and just kind of look at this data, people that are going through this data privately too. I know there's a lot of people out there too. Everyone who is chatting here, everyone who leaves comments, everyone who is just looking at this case to try to find out what really happened here, to understand why would anybody think David Crowley did this? Based on what? Like, what type of logic could you have to say that David Crowley did this? And it's so strange, and it's so interesting, and it's so great to hear so many people's different views on this case that, and like I said, this is a monthly podcast. This will continue on for a very long time. And I don't know how many shows we're going to get out of this last chapter here, but we're coming towards the end of this book. And so then we'll have to take a step back and kind of look at, okay, well, where do we go from here now? We can do the replays over and over again, but what does that mean for this podcast? Where does this podcast go once we complete this book? Because the book and the podcast, that's the reason why the podcast is there, because of this book. Well, once we finish this book, what do we do then? So think about that. God bless you all. And until next month, have a great day, my friends. William, any final words before we check out here?
Just to remember, everybody, David, it was literally impossible for David to have done this. We've already gone over the evidence hundreds of times, I would argue. It does not show any.
And there's going to be hundreds more, my friend.
Oh, I'm sure. I am absolutely sure of it. But I think there's been plenty of us out there that have broken it down several times over. It was literally an impossibility for David to have done this. So if he didn't do it, who did?
There you go. All right. And with that said, I think that's a great way to end this here. All right, everyone. God bless you all. And until next month, we'll be back.